Welcome to everybody. Welcome to the lecture series on Plato's The Republic. This series of lectures is meant for the postgraduate students of English language and literature, and especially for the students of the colleges of University of Calicut. This is the second video lecture. In the first video lecture we had the introduction on Plato and an introduction on the Republic, and this lecture we are looking at book 2 of the Republic. We in fact go for a very detailed analysis of book 2 of the Republic of Plato. So in book 1, Socrates started the quest for true definition of justice. After considering and rejecting some conventional definitions, the conversation produced two crucial conclusions. First, justice is not a craft like medicine or shipbuilding, but has a unique character. And second, justice never harms, it only brings benefits. Halfway through book 1, Thrasymachus enters the conversation and defines justice as the advantage of the stronger. Socrates disagrees and they argue. In the beginning of book 2, Thrasymachus abandons the conversation and two more speakers, Glaucon and Adeimantus, take over his position. Book 2 falls into three roughly equal parts, which can be called: number 1, Glaucon's challenge; number 2, the political metaphor; number 3, the guardians, their character and education. The guardians are the guardians of the city, the rulers of the ideal state or ideal city, the Republic. Let's look at each of the three sections or other three parts of book 2. First, Glaucon's challenge. This is the first third of book 2 up to approximately section 368c. Several very important things happen in this section of book 2. So we have to read these pages very carefully. Glaucon's challenge contains three important passages. Passage 1, the framework giving three types of goods. Passage 2, the story of the natural origin of justice. And passage 3, the story of the ring of Gyges. And exam point of view, these three can be questions. So students has to be very careful. So maybe exam point of view, you can expect a question like, what is Glaucon's challenge in book 2 of the Republic of Plato? Or rather, it could be another question or other three different questions like, what does Glaucon say about the three classes of good? Number 2, what is the story of the natural origin of justice as said by Plato in the Republic? Number 3, what is the story of the ring of Gyges? So let us look at these three passages from Glaucon's challenge in book 2 of the Republic at this moment. These three passages make up Glaucon's challenge. Book 2 starts by giving a framework for the discussion to follow. Glaucon says, there are three classes of goods. Class 1, good that are valued for themselves alone. Things like harmless pleasures, like playing a game, certainly because I enjoy playing a game. I enjoy football, I enjoy cricket, I enjoy maybe playing anything. Not because I hope to get anything out of it, but just because I enjoy it and it has some pleasure in it. And class 2 good, according to Glaucon, goods that are valued for themselves and for their results. Things like knowing or seeing or being healthy. These things are pleasant and good in themselves, and they also make it possible for me to do other pleasant and good things. So that is the second class of good according to Glaucon. And the third class of good according to Glaucon is goods that are valued for their results but which are burdensome in themselves. These are things like exercise or taking medicine or doing physical labor in exchange for money. No one would do these things unless they are somehow connected to some kind of external structure. Glaucon asks Socrates which category justice belongs to. What type of goods is it? Socrates says he thinks it is in the second category. It is like good health or seeing. It is valuable in itself and it is valuable in its consequences. So, goods that are valued for themselves and for their results, like knowing, learning, seeing, these things are pleasant and good in themselves, right? Glaucon replies that the masses, the common people, would probably disagree with Plato. They would put justice in category 3. They would say that being just has good consequences, but it is burdensome and difficult in itself, and nobody would do it unless they had to. So, crucial to note here is they differ not on the results of justice, which they agree are beneficial. They disagree on the question of whether justice is valuable in itself in isolation from its practical effect on our lives. Glaucon then takes up Thrasymachus' side of the argument, saying that he wants Socrates to demonstrate the value of justice and injustice in the soul, independent of their consequences. Glaucon insists that he doesn't believe what he is about to say about justice, but he wants to state a strong case for Thrasymachus' point of view so that Socrates can defeat it. It's worth pausing to note the value of this work by Glaucon. It is valuable because if we have relied on Thrasymachus to carry on his side of the argument, he would not learn anything, because Thrasymachus got fed up and walked away. And it is also giving us a very good example of the practice of stating an enemy's case in the strongest possible form before attacking it. This is an example of the intellectual honesty and integrity of Socrates' method. Glaucon then tells what he thinks the masses believe, and this is his story of the natural origin of justice. So, the natural origin of justice, the story of Glaucon, can be seen in section 258 to 359 of book 2. And Glaucon says primitive people recognized that doing injustice was good and suffering injustice was bad. This is very important. So, according to Glaucon, primitive people recognized that doing injustice was good and suffering injustice was bad. So, it feels good to beat up people who are smaller than me. But it feels bad to get beat up by the people who are bigger and stronger than me. So this is the natural origin of justice. Most people being in the middle experience both sides of this. They were able to victimize others, but they were also the victims of other people who were stronger than them. And they realized that the pain of suffering, oppression was greater than the pleasure they got from oppressing the weaker. So they agreed among themselves that no one would victimize anyone else. This is what they decided to call justice. Therefore, justice, Glaucon says, is an agreement between people who are too weak to dominate everyone else. It is something like a truce in the war of the strong against the weak, which has been called by all the people who know that they are not the strongest. We can recognize that this is the basic idea behind the social contract theory. The abstract of the story is that for each person, justice is always a second best situation. It's what I settle for instead of my best case scenario, which would be my being powerful enough to dominate everyone around me. And this is why Glaucon says that the people only do justice unwillingly. That is, they are just only because they realize that they are not strong enough to get away with being unjust. But if they could get away with it, they certainly would choose injustice in domination as the better life in itself. To illustrate this, Glaucon tells the story of the ring of Gyges. He considers the case of just and an unjust person and what they would do if they have complete freedom of action to act exactly as they like if there is no consequence for their reputation. Now we have the story of the ring of Gyges. So exam point of view, maybe we have a question like summarize the ring of Gyges story, and what lesson does Glaucon think it teaches about the difference between being just and seeming to be just? Okay, so we know the story of the legend of the ring of Gyges, and after he tells the story of Gyges, Glaucon compares the just life to the unjust life. So we have the story of ring of Gyges, and in the story the ring of Gyges we come across the just life and the unjust life. To separate the benefits of reputation from the benefits of actually just or unjust, Glaucon is going to compare two extremes. He is going to compare a just person whom everyone thinks is unjust to the unjust person who everyone thinks is just. So maybe we have a number of cases in history like that, in which of course a just person was just treated or considered or thought to be unjust. Maybe we have the case of Nambi Narayan, the scientist in Kerala history. So it is like thinking that, okay, so maybe we have one side a just person, and maybe we think that that just person is not just. rather that just person is unjust. Maybe it could be something like, okay, we have Gandhiji, and if people say that Gandhiji is like Hitler, it is exactly like people think that a just person is unjust. And the opposite of that is, of course, right. When people think that an unjust person, maybe, of course, to everyone is just like, maybe people think that, okay, Hitler is just like Mahatma Gandhi. So this is the explanation of Glaucon about being just and unjust. So, if being just always makes one happy, we would end that unjust always makes one miserable. We would expect these two lives to be happy and miserable. So, the challenge that Glaucon poses to Socrates is compare these two extreme lives. The just life for the reputation of injustice and the unjust life for the reputation of justice. And prove to Glaucon, Glaucon asked Socrates to prove to Glaucon that the just life is still preferable, is still happier, and is still the life more worthy of imitation for somebody who is trying to choose how to live their life. At this point, Glaucon's brother Adeimantus interrupts and gives his own defense of injustice. He points out that people who praise justice still seem to believe that injustice will be better for an individual. People who praise justice, he says, Adeimantus says, really are only praising its reputation. I repeat, people who praise justice, according to Adeimantus, really are only praising its reputation. Injustice is sweet and easy to acquire. The unjust person who has secured for himself a reputation for justice lives the life of a god. This is very clear from the story of Gyges. Okay, the unjust person who has secured for himself a reputation for justice lives the life of a god. That is the best life possible. The unjust life with a reputation for justice. So Adeimantus puts his challenge to Socrates again, slightly differently. Show us, Adeimantus says, how justice by itself makes a person happy, and show us how injustice by itself harms a person. So this is another challenge of Adeimantus. To respond to this challenge, Socrates is going to introduce the next stage of book 2, which is the political metaphor. We have the political metaphor in book 2. That is again very, very important. And exam point of view, we have a question like, what is the political metaphor that is introduced by Socrates in book 2 of the Republic? So in order to respond to the challenge of Adeimantus, that how justice by itself makes a person happy, and how injustice by itself harms a person. So Socrates speaks about, introduces the second part of book 2, that is the political metaphor. And Socrates is going to consider the structure of an ideal city or an ideal state when he is talking about the political metaphor. And now we just come to the last part of book 2, in which we read about the political metaphor as suggested by or introduced by Plato. All right, Socrates. And okay, in book 1, we were introduced to the true definition of justice. We had the definition of justice by Thrasymachus. And Thrasymachus defined justice as the strong dominating the weak. The first third of book 2 is Glaucon's challenge, in which the brothers Glaucon and Adeimantus take over Thrasymachus' position, giving it a clear and more disciplined expression. He then challenges Socrates to defeat this view by showing how justice is beneficial to a person independently in his reputation. Socrates begins his reply at 368b, and it continues till 374a, and he introduces the political metaphor. So the political metaphor we have in sentences or section 368 to 374 in book 2 of the Republic. This is very important. So what is the political metaphor Socrates or Plato speak about in the Republic? So let us understand. Socrates proposes to examine the nature of justice in a city which is larger and easier to observe than a soul. We can then see what this will tell us about justice in the soul. The idea is that we will be better able to see what justice is when it is writ large in the city. This message assumes that political justice and justice in the soul are the same thing, just on different scales. This is an assumption that will be challenged by the Machiavellian principle of the Renaissance period, Machiavelli of the Renaissance period. Socrates begins by examining the origin of a city, supposing that this will allow us to see the origin of justice. So Socrates speaks about the origin of a city to help us understand the significance of justice. Socrates observes that cities are founded because no individual is self-sufficient. Okay, human beings are social animals, right? Okay, man is a social animal. So Socrates observes that cities are founded because no individual is self-sufficient. So we need other people if we are going to flourish and survive. We have to depend. Of course, we have families, neighborhoods, we have a community, a society, a city, a country. So we depend on others. And according to Plato, a healthy city has a lot of features. And exam point of view, we have a question like, what are the features of a healthy city according to Plato? So now, in order to prove justice, in order to substantiate the fact that justice is essential for happiness or pleasure, Socrates speaks about a city, and he speaks how each and every human beings depend on each other. Okay, so Glaucon objects though to Socrates' account, saying that people in the city should recline on proper couches, dine at tables, and have the relishes and desserts that people have nowadays. It seems to Glaucon, once Socrates described the luxurious city, Socrates agrees and says, in examining the luxurious city, we might discover not just the origin of justice, but also the origin of injustice. Note that in the healthy city, there is no such discrimination or no such differences. So, according to Socrates, the just city or a healthy city is a true city, and the one described in the rest of the Republic is, in fact, feverish. It is excessive, it goes beyond the requirements of human nature somehow. The luxurious city will require new goods and occupations, including jewelry, hunters, musicians, and additional servants, because it contains so much more than the healthy city. So, Socrates speaks about the healthy city. Glaucon speaks about the luxurious city, and Socrates says that the luxurious city require lot of facilities, including a lot of goods and occupations, including jewelry, hunters, musicians, additional servants, etc. And according to Socrates, a healthy city doesn't require all that. So a luxurious city contains so much more than the healthy city. The luxurious city will require an army to protect it from its enemy and to secure resources for. The ideal city will then need a specialized batch of people to serve in the army, and these are called the guardians. So, okay, look at that. So, according to Socrates, a healthy city requires, of course, the guardians, or rather a specialized batch of people. The ideal city will then need a specialized batch of people to serve in the army, and these are called the guardians. Okay, so who are the guardians? Very important. Besides, in the final part of book 2, there is the discussion of the character and education of the guardians. So Plato says that we need the servants, specialized people to serve the ideal city, and those specialized people to serve in the ideal city are the guardians. And okay, in the next part of subsequent part of book 2, Socrates speaks about the kind of character and education of the guardians. Now we are looking at of course the very character, or rather the training, character and education of the guardians. So now the conversation of all these people turns to, okay, who will serve in the armies? The guardians, and what they must be like in order to guard the city well. So what kind of training should be given, or rather what traits must the guardians of the city have? What should be the characteristic, or what are the qualities and characteristics of the guardians of the city? The city now need guardians and must train the guardians to have some specific traits so that they can do their job well. Okay, like they can secure resources, they can of course protect the city, and they must be trained very well. So Socrates, Glaucon, and Adeimantus discuss what the education of the guardians must be like. Education and music and poetry will come first to train the minds of the guardians. And besides mental training, the guardians must also be given physical training. They should be given physical training. As children, the future guardians will be told stories of gods and heroes. And Socrates observes that these stories about the guardians are especially important because children's minds are malleable, and wrong ideas that they learn while they are young may destroy their character and make them unable to function as proper guardians for the city. So Socrates is of the opinion that the literature, or rather the content of the syllabus must be appropriate. That there are of course a lot of stories about the gods and all. So these stories about gods and heroes must be very, very appropriate, because if the stories are not appropriate, that may destroy the character of the future guardians. So Socrates continues his argument, and he argues that the young guardians must be told or taught only very fine and excellent and beautiful stories, and the city must not permit telling false stories about the gods. Thus the ideal city will have to practice some kind of official censorship. All right, so remember, this is what Socrates says, right? The stories children are taught must be, of course, full of very valuable values, so that of course they become real heroes or real guardians who can contribute to the very, very city state. Now he continues, he says, poets cannot tell any stories they want about the gods. They must tell true stories, and stories that improve the virtue and patriotism of the guardians. This is very, very important. So Socrates is insisting on the fact that, okay, no very, very imaginative and violent kind of stories must be included in the syllabus of the training of the children. Okay, so there must be very, very inspiring true stories, and those stories should improve the virtue and patriotism of the guardians, because the health of the entire city depends upon the kind of training that is imparted to the guardians. And Socrates is asking he says that we have to ensure the arts of the poets and the dramatists must be obedient to the philosophers and science into the truth of things. Okay, so they must always, the poets must always be obedient to philosophers and scientists or scientific ideas. Now of course we have to, so with this we come to the end of this is what we read in book 2. Okay, and we have to pay special attention to the specific stories. Okay, like Socrates says that pay special attention to the specific stories that that will just influence the young minds, and always ensure that bad stories are just removed. Okay, so such stories, bad stories which may influence the children, the future guardians negatively, should be prohibited. All right, and otherwise of course the ideal, there won't be an ideal city or an ideal state like that. Okay, so with this of course we come to the end of the book 2. Of course there is much more to speak about the ideal city and the guardians and their education and training, and all that we can see in the subsequent books like book 3, 4, 5 and all. So book 2 is of course primarily, or the most important ideas in book 2 are, number 1 of course the very challenge of Glaucon's challenge and the political metaphor, and of course the notion of Socrates on the very training of the guardians, right? So Glaucon's challenge, Glaucon is challenging the notion of justice of Socrates, and he speaks about the three classes of goods, and thereafter he speaks about the story of the natural origin of justice, and he also speaks about the story, he speaks the story of the ring of Gyges, and at last we have the counter argument of Socrates with the political theory, and he says that man is a social animal, and we have to depend on each other, and because we have to depend on each other, there must be justice, and otherwise we don't have that ideal state or ideal city, and the ideal city requires guardians. So these guardians must be given proper training. Their character must be perfect. Otherwise, the ideal city will not be a reality. So he is again asking the authority to be very careful about the kind of training, mental training and physical training that is to be given to the children, who are of course the future guardians. So with that, we come to the end of book 2, and in the next video we will be moving to the book 3. Book 3 is again about the training that is to be given to the guardians of the city, that we shall have in another lecture. So thank you everybody for listening. May God bless you.